Welcome back to TUSB Conversation Starters. We are speaking with Dr. Susmita Mohanty, who is a space designer, entrepreneur, and a space diplomat. As someone who leads a Renaissance life and takes on offbeat assignments and challenging roles, Sushmita's take on entrepreneurship and leadership is highly sought after by business leaders. We find out today about the world of space and politics with her. Welcome to the show, Sushmita.
Thank you, Shreya. Thank you for having me.
So, Sushmita, you are the only space entrepreneur in the world to have started space companies on three different continents. How did you go about doing this?
I think I would attribute this to a couple of things. One is fearlessness. I kind of approach everything without the, with sort of the intrepid spirit that you need to go through unknown, uncharted realms. And nothing really stops me if I want to go out and do something. So I think fearlessness is one. And the other thing is these amazing friendships that I've made around the world, having lived in different parts of the world, because most of my space endeavors have been co-founded with these friends of mine. My first space company in San Francisco was with a friend who is a fellow alumni of the International Space University. My second venture, which was co-founded in Vienna in 2005, is also with a friend of mine who was a classmate of mine at the International Space University, and she is an architect who lives in Vienna. And the third one was with a friend who I became friends with while living in San Francisco, and that's the India venture I'm referring to. So I think most people will tell you that never start a business with a friend, but I think my life is a great example of how you can do business with friends. And in our particular case, this is not a business that's driven just by the bottom line, just by profits. It's a business that is driven by shared passion for space and exploration and all of those good things.
Thanks, Sushmita, for sharing this personal journey with us. So, but what have been the challenges of setting up space companies in three different geographies?
Well, the challenges have been huge. Space, unlike many other tech sectors, is is a realm in which you have technologies that always have dual purpose, right? For example, a rocket can launch a satellite, which can be used for telecommunications, remote sensing, GPS, and at the same time, a rocket can be a missile, which can carry a weapon head. So I think starting a space company in any geography, especially if you're a foreign national, is extremely, extremely difficult because a lot of things happen on sites where they're working on civilian space missions and as well as on defense space missions. So I would say that it was a huge challenge for an Indian national such as myself to start a space company, first in the United States, then in Europe. And starting a space company in India, the challenge was not so much on nationality and the dual purpose nature of space, but the fact that India, when I moved back in 2008, was not really ready for a space startup. That was my third venture and India's first space startup. And at that point in 2008, 2009, the government wasn't really open to the idea of letting private entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, come into the scene and thrive. Now, almost 12 years later, I'm starting to see that change and for the better. So I'm happy about that.
Wonderful. When I was conceptualizing this conversation, I thought it will be all about technology and science. But then when I was talking to you, you mentioned how politics is an integral part of what you do. You say space is politics. So can you tell our listeners a bit more about your role as a space diplomat and what brought you into this space diplomacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think space is a great mirror where you can read the geopolitics of the times. If you look at the Cold War era back in the 60s, space was a very important component of that race between the Soviet Union and United States. If you look at space today, the way it is, we have an ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And Russia is a partner, a very important partner of the International Space Station program. This space station is orbiting the Earth as I speak. And Russia and the United States are the two leading entities that brought together 16 nations to build the space station and operate it in outer space. There was also a time between 2011 and 2020 when the United States, for example, did not have a human ferry, as in a human spaceplane or a capsule to carry their astronauts to the International Space Station. And Russia stepped in because they have the Soyuz. The Americans had chosen to retire the shuttle fleet, and they were building a new space transportation system, but they didn't have one until 2020. So those 9 years, without Russia's help, the Americans couldn't have made it to the International Space Station, right? So I think technology can be an amazing tool for diplomacy, for ensuring safety, security, and to some extent peace in this world, which is why I think these kind of international cooperation projects are of extreme importance. So in my personal life, my space trajectory has been professional one, it's almost like 25 years now that I've been part of the professional space world. And I've often seen that I've had to play the role of a space diplomat, where I bring in not only my technical expertise, but my understanding of geopolitics to solve situations that we find ourselves in, because I have been working, with the Americans, the Europeans, the Japanese, the Russians. So one such example is a recent one from 2009, when I reached out to the American State Department and Trade Department, that's on the Washington, D.C. side, and I reached out to the Ministry of External Affairs here in India at a time when the two countries were not even willing to come to the negotiating table because of the 1998 US embargo on India. This embargo was imposed on India when India conducted nuclear tests, and it prevents space companies from the US to sell components to India. And I wanted to find a way to make it possible for the Indian rocket, the PSLV, to have access to the American launch market. And I wanted American satellite makers to have access to the Indian rocket, which flies very frequently and is a very reliable rocket. And it almost seemed impossible when I started out with these conversations. And remember, I'm not a government diplomat, because a government diplomat approaches diplomacy in a very different way. They have to toe the official line. But I came from a vantage point of having understood how the space programs in our respective nations work and why this bridge between the US and India makes sense. And remember, this is 2009. This was before India and the US started cozying up through Quad and, because of all the recent developments with China. So I was trying to bring India and US together despite an embargo. And I would say I was successful. It took me a good 3 to 5 years, but I was successful in making that happen, in having US, the first historical launch agreement between the Indian Space Agency and an American client of mine, Skybox Imaging, happen in 2014. And history was made. So I think that sort of gives you a little bit of an idea of how space diplomacy works.
Wow, thanks for sharing this, Sushmita. This is incredible. We could have never imagined this dimension of your role. So, since you've been at the core of these things, what were the 3 big developments or disruptions in the world of space tech in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, as per you?
Okay, let's see. We are in 2023, the first 2 decades. I would say one of the big developments, disruptions, was the fact that SpaceX developed what it calls reusable rocket boosters, right? So it's not a new idea. This idea has existed from the past century, but it was the first company in the world, or the first entity in the world, to actually make it happen. So what happens then is when you launch rockets, usually a rocket has 3 to 4 stages, and each stage burns up and falls into the ocean and is recovered. And some of those boosters are being reused multiple times. So that brings down the amount of trash that you create, the amount of pollution that you create with every single rocket launch. So I think that was an amazing technological development. The second, I think, is CubeSats. So the world of CubeSats includes small satellites, anything from a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter cube to multiples of that, right? And what the CubeSat standards for satellites did is it made it possible for students in universities, for young entrepreneurs, to be able to build small satellites with off-the-shelf components. And that's, if you ask me, has revolutionized the way we look at satellites today and the kind of applications that become possible with these easily satellites that you can put together very easily. In fact, I've even seen young people carry these small CubeSats through airport security, or you can even FedEx it. I think that has made satellite making a much more democratic enterprise and therefore brings in a lot more innovation into the satellite application space. The third one, let me think, in the last 2 decades would, I think, be private spaceflight. I would attribute it to these companies, Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, and there are more in the making, who will make it possible for ordinary citizens to fly into outer space. For now, they're offering suborbital flights where you launch from Earth and go up to around 100 kilometers, and you get to see the curvature of the Earth and float free for a few seconds, and you come right back down. But I think in the coming years, they'll also be offering flights where you go around the Earth, you orbit the Earth. So I think space tourism is the other big disruption that I've seen in the last couple of decades.
Absolutely. And since you are a futurist, could you also share with us what do you think are the three big space technological developments we should look forward to from now until 2050?
I think that's a good question as well. I think in the coming, we are in 2023, so 2050 would be, say, another 25 odd years. I definitely think we will have human presence on the moon, possibly towards the South Pole. I can totally see China leading the human lunar exploration side of things, and United States and allies also doing the same. That's one. Second, I think we will see some amazing developments in the area of materials, advanced materials, because materials play a very important role in space technology. Whether you're making spacesuits or you're making rocket ships, materials are a very important component of that technological development trajectory. So I can possibly imagine things like carbon nanotubes, which are currently in the research phase, still in the lab phase, becoming commercially viable to produce in larger quantities. I'm just giving you a small example, but there are many other such materials that we need to develop further to be able to build things which have been, say, in the realm of science fiction for all these years, but might become reality. And one such idea is a space elevator that was initially introduced by Sir Arthur C. Clarke. Let me see, the third development that we might see in the coming 25 odd years would be not so much, I'm thinking on the softer side of things, the intangibles. I'm hoping that people like me and others in the international community who are worried about the pollution that human activities have caused in near Earth orbit will work together and bring in enforceable space laws that will help us declutter low Earth orbit. We have about 300 million plus debris objects orbiting in low Earth orbit, of which 36,000 are larger than 10 centimeters and are trackable at any point. So we need to find ways to declutter this orbit, and the new debris that is being added at an alarming pace because of new satellite constellations that companies are launching and also because of anti-satellite tests, we need to bring in laws to make sure that there are stricter regimes in how soon you need to bring down your dead satellites, for example. And I hope that in the coming couple of decades, we will have those regulations in place.
Thank you so much for making time and giving us a glimpse into your fascinating world, Susmita.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You were listening to Dr. Susmita Mohanty. If you would like to know more about Susmita and invite her for a talk in your organization, please reach out to the team at the Outstanding Speakers Bureau. We'll be back again with another interesting conversation, another interesting story. Till then, keep learning and keep exploring.